Well, it's a significant anniversary. Not only the birthday of the executive producer, Tom Story, who's normally here with us on In My View, but it's also the outbreak of the American Civil War. On this day, just before dawn in 1861, cannon roared into action in Charleston, South Carolina. Local militia of the state of South Carolina attacked the federal garrison at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbour. The American Civil War had begun. None of those clamouring for secession on one side or for the abolition of slavery on the other could have imagined the slaughter that ensued. 624,000 Americans died during that gruesome struggle to determine whether, in the words of that great statesman Abraham Lincoln, any nation so conceived could long endure. Well, endure it did, and it went on to become a superpower, briefly enjoying a unipolar moment as the unrivalled global hegemon. Today, it faces a different threat, but yet again on its own soil. Today, there are no armed troops threatening to lay siege to Washington, nor are there smouldering ruins of towers destroyed by terrorists. No, rather today an invisible virus is killing thousands of Americans every day. For the first time since that April morning over 150 years ago, the cohesion and strength of the United States is being attacked by an invisible enemy within its own borders. Even before COVID-19 escaped from the wet markets in Wuhan, the global system, underwritten by American economic and military power, was being challenged by China. To the Trump haters and the haters of the United States more generally, be careful what you wish for. History does not take vacations. Australia needs the United States to emerge from this crisis intact and confident. Nor should we forget that the odious nature of that Chinese regime, whose arrogance and secrecy both spawned and concealed this pandemic until it was running riot throughout the world. Well, Antoinette, you're a notorious Donald Trump supporter. What's your prognosis for the United States on the other side of this virus? Do you see them emerging as a global leader, or do you think they will have ceded hegemony to China?
Have you seen me wearing my MAGA hat on the weekend, Catherine? Is that where you've deduced my position?
Please put it on Instagram. I've got to see it.
Look, firstly, it absolutely shocks and saddens me, the images that are coming out of New York, the mass graves, the impact is unparalleled. I mean, now the United States has the most victims to the pandemic, and the worst is yet to come. But I would say that we need both a strong United States as a military and political ally, as we do a strong China for the economic benefit. But I think the tide is beginning to turn in terms of public opinion against Trump. A poll out this week showed approval ratings have slumped, and that's in direct response to his perceived handling of the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, the worst is yet to come. So how that plays out in the November election is yet to be seen. But I don't think it's going to go well for him.
Yeah, it seems that his response has been a bit laggard, certainly, and there was a good piece in The Australian over the weekend by Cameron Stewart, who's a very, very solid analyst on the United States. Karina, what's your view? Do you think the United States is resilient and will bounce back from this and occupy a central role in the global power balance, or do you think this is a symptom and trigger of further American decline?
Well, let's certainly hope so. The US is our country's biggest investor, and to some extent our economic fortunes are intertwined with theirs. But Donald Trump said that just 2 weeks ago that their country would be open for business over this Easter weekend, and on Good Friday he announced that they wouldn't be opening up again until they were once more healthy. You know, they have had, as Antoinette said, such a significant number of deaths, and the real difference is that our country took action early, and as a result we haven't had the same devastation. But it is great news that the curve is flattening now in the US. The question will be whether they will, I suppose, have the fortitude to not become complacent. They've got summer coming up, which is great for them, but they can't become complacent because there could certainly be a second outbreak.
But it's interesting, traditionally.
Yeah, well, Catherine, I might go somewhere a bit different on this. I think just the dynamic, more about the dynamic between China and the US now, and I find that to be one of the most worrying things about this, but it's obviously incredibly interesting as well. And firstly, on the China front, a lot of the nonsense that's being spoken about somehow this was done by the Chinese, and look, this has been really bad for China. I mean, it has hurt their economy. They're massively trying to get back on the front foot in terms of their relations with nations around the world. And there's this huge backlash about sourcing stuff. We're just talking about sourcing product from China in the future. So that's bad for their economy, bad for Australia. The other side of the equation, you've got the United States, who probably going to wear a pretty big impact here because they're a democracy. They don't get to do the things that a Chinese Communist Party can do in China to lock a place down. So they will be hit hard. But I've got to tell you, the Americans in high places, and not just in politics, but in supposedly sober, sensible people in the financial markets, are out for revenge. And there's a lot of talk about reparations. There's a lot of talk about reneging on the debt that China holds in US Treasury paper. And you just wonder where this all goes to ultimately. I hope it doesn't lead to armed conflict.
I'd agree with you.
Look, I think the reparations argument's nonsense, to be honest, and I hasten to add I distance myself entirely from the conspiracy theories that this was a deliberate germ attack. I think that's just nonsense from the dark web. And
well, it's so destructive.
Do you want to respond to Cam?
Oh, I was just going to say...
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, Campbell, as you mentioned, everybody is suffering in this pandemic, and it's really easy for people to want, as you mentioned, reparations or to seek some sort of revenge. But the entire globe is suffering, and what we need is for the United States to get through the worst, which is yet to come. And as we see, China is recovering, beginning to, which is good news, and hopefully that's a blueprint for how the rest of the world will follow. But interestingly, usually in situations of national emergencies, people rally around the flag, so to speak, and put their support behind their leaders. But what I'm finding interesting in this emergency and this pandemic, that isn't happening in the United States.
What I find interesting is that there are Chinese citizens themselves who are calling on their government to provide reparation for loss of life of their family members. So it will be interesting to see what action Chinese citizens might take against their own government. If such action is taken, and if it were successful, then I think that does open up that Pandora's box of, what do other countries do if there is some responsibility on behalf of the Chinese government in terms of how they handle the crisis, trying to cover it up, allowing people to travel overseas and spread the disease. These are things that, could well need to be considered into the future.